In this segment, what we're going to do is actually look at some practicalities that will help us get started with working with Haskell. Okay, so first of all, I want to point you to the web page, which is a resource for the book, the various aspects of the book, but also more generally things I want to refer to here. And I've provided a QR code and the URL for that page. I'll bring this page up again later on so you get another chance to grab that information. So first of all on the page, we have links to the PDF of the book, Haskell, the Craft of Functional Programming. We have a link to the Cabal package, which is the Haskell packaging framework, and that allows you to download the code for the Craft 3E book, and also the legacy website, which has some materials. This is a new website that I'm pointing to, but there's a legacy site that has some other materials that haven't been migrated yet. As I said on the page, the aim is this is part of a process to turn the book into a full online resource, make it a much more interactive experience than you get simply with a PDF. And I hope to have that done by the end of 2026. But for the moment, what we have is the PDF and these other materials. Okay. The next group of links are to Haskell systems. So the key one is the Getting Started link. That is from the haskell.org, basic reference for all things Haskell. And this is the page on which you can see how to download and install GHCI, the Glasgow compiler, GHCI, which is the interactive version, and other support for things like Haskell inside editors and IDEs. That's all detailed on the page here. Now, of course, if you're in a university or a school, you may well have this provided by your institution, but if you want to run it on your own machine, this is the place to find out information. If you want to run some aspects of Haskell, that is the Haskell compiler, without installing anything on your machine, then there is a Haskell playground, and there's a link to that in this next block. And there is also the Haskell system Hoogle, which is a great resource for looking up functions in libraries, not according to their name, but according to their type. Because often we know what type of function we want, but we can't remember the particular name it has in the library. That's what Hoogle gives us. Now some other websites for Haskell, haskell.org, which is the starting point for all the Haskell information on the web, and two particular places where you can see discussions about Haskell. There's Haskell Reddit and Haskell on Stack Overflow. And then finally, there's a block of links about to another free book, Learn Your Haskell for Great Good, which has been around for a long time, is well-respected book, alternative to Introduction to Learning Haskell. There's an overview of all the Haskell books that are out there, and a link to the Haskell Wiki book, which is an immense wiki enterprise built by users, for users, divided in two parts, partly for beginners and partly more advanced users. So that's a mine of information. And then finally a link to particular aspects of how to do non-pure programming inside Haskell, what's called the awkward squad. So those are the links that are on this page. And again, here is the QR code and the URL linking to that page, from which you can get all these other resources. Okay, what about using Haskell itself? Well, what we do is use GHC in this course. We'll use GHCI, which is the interactive version of Haskell, and it works a bit like a calculator. What you can do with GHCI is type in an expression, and what you get back is the value of that expression. You can ask for the type of an expression, and you can also add definitions inside GHCI. You can make your own definitions and then use them. So let's take a look at that now. Here we are in the terminal. Let's launch GHCI. Here it comes, and then we can type an expression like 3 plus 4, and we get the answer 7. We can ask for the type of something like true, and we get the answer, that's a Boolean, or the type of not, which is a function that works over Booleans, that is a function from Booleans to Booleans. So that gives us, that shows us how we evaluate expressions and how we get get types. What we can also do is add our own definitions. So we could say let trip of x be 3 times x. So this is giving us the triple of x. And then we can use that definition to get the answer 12. But the real downside of doing that is as soon as you quit GHCI, you've lost that definition. If we quit and then go back in again and ask what is trip of 4, we get the answer variable not in scope. It's saying trip variable not in scope. In layman's terms, layperson's terms, is saying trip is not defined. So what we do is that we, instead of adding definitions inside GHCI, we put those definitions inside a file. And what I'll show you now is how we do that. So let's just tidy that up. Let's move this across. And as you can see, this terminal is actually inside Visual Studio Code. I will open up the sidebar. I've opened in here, I've opened the folder which contains all the code which was in the Craft 3E package. What I'm going to do here is open up particularly this file, test.hs. So now we've got a test file with a couple of definitions inside. Let's go into GHCI again, and we will load test. We do that by typing L test, or we could also type L test.hs. Whoops, and that works. So we have got our test file loaded, and in order to see that, we can evaluate EX, or we can use that in larger expressions. So we can take EX and say, what's EX plus 34? The answer is 41. And we can also use the function double to double EX, giving us the answer 14, or double of EX plus 34 gives us the answer 82. One thing to be aware of, what do you think I'll get if I write this, double of EX plus 34 without the brackets? Will I get 82 again? No, I get 48, because the way this works is that function application, which you get by writing the function next to its arguments, binds more tightly than anything else. So double EX plus 34 is exactly the same as putting it in brackets. And if we want the EX plus 34 to be a single argument to double, we have to put that in parentheses. So the advice here is, if in doubt, put parentheses where you want them to be. You won't get in trouble for putting in too many parentheses. Now let's just see this at work, and let's add this definition of trip. So we'll say trip is of type integer to integer, and we'll say trip of y, which is a different name for a variable, is 3 times y. We didn't mean year format, that was silly. And let's ignore this. Sometimes the editor is too clever by half. I've got this was provided by the Haskell language server inside VS Code, but let's say we want it to be 3 times y here. Okay, so what we have now is this definition of 3 times y. That's inside test.hs, but in order to get that inside our GHCI session, we have to save the file. You can see I've done that, and then we can reload the module. And we're doing that by typing R, or we could type L test again. And then we can use trip of 4, and we get the answer 12. So we make the edit in the left-hand pane, we save the file, and then we reload in the right hand. And this is typically how we develop programs in Haskell. We work within an editor, the editor of your choice. You save the file, and then that is loaded. You then load that into GHCI or reload it. Now the editor itself may give you some feedback. If I cross off the ER there, I get the answer that this is not recognized as a type. So I am getting feedback without saving and going into GHCI. But if I want to evaluate expressions using the definitions in the file, I have to load them into GHCI. And I think the final command I should note is that if we want to quit a session, we type :Q. So let's go back to our presentation. So we've seen those, we've seen the example of evaluating an expression, finding a type. We've seen typing a definition to the prompt, but we've also seen that we can take a file, a module, and load that module, which is stored in a file, test.hs. We load that module into GHCI, and once we've loaded it, we can evaluate expressions that involve the definitions in that module. And then finally, what we can see is that if we make a change in a definition, we can either type in a module, we can either load that module again, or we can type :R to reload the last module we loaded. And then finally, when we want to quit a session, we type :Q for quit. So that gets us started with GHCI. We'll spend some time in the next block of segments looking at some of the things that can go wrong in GHCI, in particular dealing with errors of all kinds inside GHCI, which inevitably you'll have to get used to dealing with. So we'll run through some of those, and I'll get you to try some out for yourselves. But in the meantime, you can see that the basic operation of working with GHCI is very simple. We can evaluate expressions, we can ask for the type of expressions, we put definitions into modules, we can then load those modules into GHCI, and we can use those definitions then inside expressions that we evaluate. And that's it.